Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to stately Vaughn Manor, where it's Wednesday, which means it's Epic Comic Book Wednesday. Every Wednesday, I'll talk about a certain comic book, graphic novel, or comic book subject. Steve Donoghue, on his channel, will talk about the same comic book, graphic novel, or comic book subject. It is our world's finest team-up that we do once a week. And this week's pretty special because I, on my channel, am doing the Marvel Comics Starter Kit, my Marvel Comics Starter Kit. Steve over on his channel will be doing his DC Comics Starter Kit. He knows a lot about DC Comics. I've always been more of a Marvel guy, so let's talk Marvel Comics. Marvel has been producing comic books that are set in the Marvel Universe since 1961. That's a long time to draw comic books and write comic books. So, where do you start with all these? Now, if you only know Marvel from the movies, which are kind of popular, you might have seen one or two of those, and you're interested in reading the comic books, where do you start? Well, I'm here to help you out because I've thought a lot about this, and I've come up with some comic book stories that I think are the perfect place to start for all of these important Marvel characters. Well, at least a lot of the important Marvel characters. So let's get started. First of all, stop pestering me, little one. This is Zorro, and Zorro won't leave me alone. Zorro, don't you know I'm trying to do a Marvel Comics Starter Kit, little one? Yes, so let me do my Marvel Comics Starter Kit, silly boy. All right, we're gonna... What did I just say? What did I just say? I'm trying to do my Marvel Comics Starter Kit, little one. He's a very nice boy, but he won't let me film. Okay, you gotta let me film, little one. All right. Say hi to the people. Hi, everybody. Hello. Okay. The Marvel Universe. Where do we start with Marvel Comics? We have to start with the Fantastic Four. The Fantastic Four was the first real Marvel comic. This is the first comic book that showed up that was set in the Marvel Universe, what became the Marvel Universe. Now this is the first Marvel Comics Fantastic Four omnibus, and this has the initial issues of the Fantastic Four. I think that you should read the first few issues of the Fantastic Four. Let's say the first 20 issues of the Fantastic Four, which you could find in this Marvel Comics omnibus. You can also find it in the first Marvel Comics Epic collection for the Fantastic Four, which I think is called the world's greatest comic magazine. These aren't the greatest Fantastic Four stories, but they are pretty great Fantastic Four stories. And when you read these, you're reading the beginning of the Marvel Universe. You're watching the Marvel Universe be born and develop. And so in this first page of the Fantastic Four, this is the first page of Marvel Comics, really. Previous to this, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby did a bunch of really cool monster comics. And you see a lot of that in here. These initial stories of the Fantastic Four, they were full of monsters, including The Thing, who becomes the most popular character in the Fantastic Four. But these comics were just a lot of fun, and they reintroduced characters like the Submariner. We also see Doctor Doom there, the most important villain in the Marvel Universe, and one of the greatest villains in all of comic books. So these stories are they're just great fun. They're great stories from Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, where, you know, we get these original early Fantastic Four adventures. It's great stuff. The Fantastic Four only gets better from here, but you definitely want to start with this early stuff. The first 20 issues or so, I would say. Now, of course, like I said, you could find it in the first omnibus of the Fantastic Four, the first Epic collection. You can also get those early Fantastic Four Marvel Masterworks editions. And every comic book I'm going to be talking about today, you can find digitally. That's probably the easiest way if you don't mind reading digital comics. But moving on from the Fantastic Four, let's go to the most important Marvel comic book character of all, which would be Spider-Man. This is the first Spider-Man Epic Collection, because I would suggest that with Spider-Man, you start at the beginning with Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. This has the first 17 issues of Spider-Man, the Amazing Spider-Man, but it also has his origin from Amazing Fantasy number 15, which was a great origin story. This one also has the first annual, right? Yeah. And you can also get the first Spider-Man Omnibus, the first Amazing Spider-Man Omnibus, which has the entire run of Stan Lee and Steve Ditko's Spider-Man. Now, Steve Ditko, a really cool, quirky artist who created the costume for Spider-Man. He designed the Spider-Man costume. And some of these initial stories are a lot of fun. Starting off strong with the origin story in Amazing Fantasy. A great origin story. Unlike a lot of Marvel characters, the Amazing Spider-Man was great out of the gate. I mean, he was the character that we know now right away. Peter Parker was always Peter Parker. Spider-Man was always Spider-Man. And these initial stories are just dynamite. They're great stories, and you definitely want to start at the beginning with Spider-Man. These are some of the most influential Spider-Man stories. And young Peter Parker, young high school Peter Parker, that's still the Peter Parker that's showing up in the movies most of the time. A version of that character. But I would also suggest, unlike every other character I'm talking about today, I've got a second starting point for Spider-Man, because you don't want to not read these either. This is The Amazing Spider-Man, Spider-Man No More. This is the third epic collection of Spider-Man, and you can find these stories also in the second Spider-Man Omnibus. The reason I want you to check out these as well is because these are the initial stories that John Romita drew of Spider-Man. And John Romita is probably the most influential Spider-Man artist. His Spider-Man was just incredible. He drew such a beautiful version of Spider-Man and Peter Parker. His Spider-Man kind of became the way you drew Spider-Man and Peter Parker for a long time to come. His Peter Parker and his Spider-Man, it was just beautiful stuff. And these are great stories. This is the volume that has one of the most important early stories, Spider-Man No More. I probably won't be able to find it because I'm looking for it. Probably not. But Spider-Man No More is in this volume. Here it is. There's a great cover for Spider-Man No More. One of the best Spider-Man stories from these early years. This is just great stuff. So yeah, 2 starting points for Spider-Man. You don't want to miss either one of these epic collections, or at least the stories that are contained in those epic collections. Let's move on to the Incredible Hulk. Hulk smash! The Incredible Hulk. Now, unlike Spider-Man or the Fantastic Four, I'm not suggesting that you start with the initial first stories of the Hulk, which you can find in the first Hulk epic collection. He started off in his own series, the Hulk did. He had a 6-issue series. It was canceled after issue number 6. The Hulk was a great character, but it took a while for Stan Lee and Jack Kirby to get the Hulk right. He was much more intelligent than we're used to in those initial issues of the Hulk. His first issue, he was gray. He was green in the second issue and every issue after that. And there were a lot of things about the Hulk as far as how he transformed and why he transformed and all of these little things, all these little details that were just not hammered out. So those initial 6 issues were a little odd if you read them now. But this is the second The Incredible Hulk Omnibus. And this has stories from Tales to Astonish 60 through 96. It's in these stories that the Hulk becomes the Hulk that we are familiar with. He starts off the intelligent Hulk, or at least the smarter Hulk that he was in his initial series. But as the series progresses, he becomes more and more like the Hulk that we know, until he becomes Hulk smash. He becomes that character that we all know and love. And we get some Stan Lee and Jack Kirby artwork, and we get John Buscema is in here as well. A lot of interesting artwork in here. We get some Jack Kirby and John Romita artwork in here. And we also get one of my favorite inkers in here, which is Bill Everett. Bill Everett's version of the Hulk is really, really interesting and really cool. And this has some really entertaining stories in it. So this set of stories, the Tales to Astonish stories, where the Hulk was reintroduced to his own series, or in his own series, this is good stuff. And this is where I would start with the Incredible Hulk. Moving on to Captain America. Now, Captain America was a Golden Age superhero that was created by Joe Simon and Jack Kirby. But Stan Lee actually wrote some of those early Golden Age Captain America stories. Jack Kirby drew all those stories. And so they both wanted to bring Captain America back. And they did in the Marvel Universe. And they brought him back in the Avengers, in the Avengers number 4, which is included in here. This is the first Captain America epic collection, Captain America Lives Again. Again, you could find these stories in the first Captain America Omnibus and those early Marvel Masterworks Captain America editions. A great set of stories in here, and this is where you want to start with Captain America, with his initial return in the Avengers. That's such a great cover. Captain America returning and becoming a member of the Avengers, and that became really important. And also, we have the initial Jack Kirby solo stories for Captain America, and these are just great action stories. These initial stories of Captain America were just action-packed, tremendously entertaining. We see the evil Red Skull, one of the creepiest villains around, to make his reappearance in the Marvel Universe. And some of the really important early Captain America stories, and you also have some other artists like Gil Kane shows up to draw Captain America. Gil Kane, a great author or a great artist who drew every superhero, I think. We get the Cosmic Cube, which featured in the first Captain America movie. So we get a lot of cool stuff. This is where I would start with Captain America. Thor is a little bit different, though. Now, with Thor, I wouldn't actually start at the beginning, because the initial Thor stories, the origin story by Jack Kirby and Stan Lee was pretty good. But after that, the quality kind of varied. And again, much like the Hulk, Thor really wasn't the Thor that we know so much in those initial Thor stories. They were still working out who Thor was and what kind of character Thor was. But in this set of stories that you can find in the Thor Epic Collection Volume 2, this has the Journey into Mystery stories that were in Journey into Mystery 110 through 125. That became, Journey into Mystery became Thor. It became the comic book Thor. They just retitled the comic. And so then we have Thor 126 through 130. And this set of stories, this is a great set of stories. You could have started in other places with Thor. You could have started with the Walt Simonson stories. But I think you should start with Jack Kirby on Thor. And this has some great Jack Kirby artwork. And these are some great stories by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. This one is introducing the Destroyer, who we saw in the first Thor film. So these are pretty important Thor stories, and they're really entertaining. And this is the set of stories where Thor becomes the character that we are familiar with. This set of stories, I mean, look at that. That's awesome. These are just some great stories with Thor. And we get a lot of adventures on Asgard in here. I think that this second epic collection, the stories in here at least, I think these are the stories that you first want to read when you're introducing yourself to this character. Then you can go back and read some of those stories which weren't so good, Some of the stories in the first Thor Epic Collection were good, but it was pretty much a mixed bag. Here you get a lot of greatness with the second Thor Epic Collection. I think this is where you should start with Thor. Now moving on to another Avenger who's pretty popular nowadays, Black Panther, the Black Panther. Now this is the Marvel Epic Collection for Black Panther Volume 1, Panther's Rage. This Epic Collection has his origin, which actually took place in the Fantastic Four. He showed up in the pages of Fantastic Four, issues 52 through 53, and then he had a series of stories in Jungle Action 6 to 24, and those have the story Panther's Rage, and that is the essential Black Panther story. So we start off with the Black Panther in the pages of the Fantastic Four. That's pretty important. But you also get these great old issues of Jungle Action and Panther's Rage, which is a tremendous story by McGregor, Don McGregor, and illustrated by Billy Graham, a great artist from the Bronze Age. And it's just a great set of stories. You can also find these stories actually in the Black Panther, the Early Years Omnibus. That's a great omnibus to get because that has a lot of early Black Panther stories in it. And you can also find it in the Penguin Classics edition of Black Panther. Penguin Classics edition has an edition of the Black Panther. And Panther's Rage, that's in there. So I would definitely check out those stories. Now we're just going on to the Avengers themselves. Again, with the Avengers, this is a set of stories that this is the origin of the Avengers. Now, the origin of the Avengers, as has been pointed out by Steve Donoghue and others, is not the greatest Avengers story, but it's an awful important Avengers story. And the issues that are in this epic collection, this is the first epic collection, Earth's Mightiest Heroes, which has Avengers 1 through 20 in it. And those are the issues I would definitely check out if you want to start reading the Avengers. It has the origin, the foundation of this superhero team, and they're fighting Loki just like they do in the first Avengers movie, although the story is a little different. But it has a lot of really cool early Avengers stories. We're introduced to Kang the Conqueror. We're introduced to so many important Avengers villains and situations and stories. Also, in this epic collection, we see the beginning of a different Avengers team. The old Avengers all have to quit at one point, and they're replaced by some characters that become really important characters, like the Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver and Hawkeye. They all show up as Avengers in some of these stories. There's Hawkeye there, and those are great stories. And those initial stories with that new lineup of the Avengers shows up in this Marvel Epic Collection, so I would definitely check out these stories. Again, you could find them in the first omnibus if you could find a copy of that, or in those initial Marvel Masterworks editions, or digitally. But yeah, you gotta check out the first 20 issues of the Avengers. Definitely. Now to move on to a few other characters. Now, one Avenger I haven't mentioned up to now, I don't know why, I think I had him out of sequence, is Iron Man. Now, Iron Man is interesting. I wouldn't actually start with the initial early Iron Man stories. In fact, I would start with some later Iron Man stories. The Iron Man stories that showed up in Iron Man 120 and 128, which show up in this trade paperback. So this is actually one of the earliest Iron Man collections. It might be the earliest Iron Man collections. I can't remember when the first Marvel Masterworks Iron Man collection came out. I don't know if it came out before or after this, but this is a pretty early collection. This was reprinted, and you can get it now as Iron Man Demon in a Bottle. And the reason I'm going to go with these stories is because this is one of the most important Iron Man stories that's ever been written. We learn a lot about the character of Tony Stark in this series of stories. A lot more really than we learned before. He develops more of a character in this set of stories. It's just a great set of stories. It also redoes his origin story. So in these stories, you get Iron Man's origin, all brilliantly done, and this origin is penciled actually by Carmen Infantino. David Michelini, or Michelini, I never can pronounce his name, so I apologize. David Michelini, or Michelini, or Michelini. I have no idea, let me know. Someone knows, I don't. But he wrote these stories. And they're just incredible stories. The artwork is wonderful. We get some John Romita Jr. and Bob Layton artwork in this set of stories as well. In this set of stories, Tony Stark is battling with his addiction to alcohol. And that was not something you saw a lot of in early comic book stories. Your main character being an alcoholic. And yeah, he has a rough time of it, Tony Stark, in this set of stories. But this is probably one of the most important Iron Man stories that you'll find. The artwork is great. It's tremendously dramatic. It's just a great story. And one of these days, hopefully sometime soon, Steve Donoghue and I will be talking about this story because it's awesome. And it's a great place to start with Iron Man. Moving on to Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange, another creation of Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. And this is the place to start with Doctor Strange. This is the Doctor Strange Omnibus #1. Has the exact same stories in it that the first Epic Collection does for Doctor Strange, which is Strange Tales 110 through 111 and 114 through 146. These are the initial stories by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, and they're so weird and so cool. And it's these stories where we get Doctor Strange origin, and they're also some of the greatest Doctor Strange stories you'll ever read. If you're interested in this character, Doctor Strange, who's become kind of important in the Marvel Universe, you're definitely going to want to check out these stories, these initial early stories of Doctor Strange by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. They're just amazing stories. They're just beautiful. And a lot of this reads like one graphic novel. A lot of the stories in here tell basically one story or one Doctor Strange adventure. It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool stuff. So if you're interested in Doctor Strange, start at the beginning with Doctor Strange. Not so much with the last character I'll be talking about today. The last character I'm going to be talking about is Daredevil. Daredevil, who has become popular through his Netflix television show, which is now on Disney Plus, I think, and there's another Daredevil show coming up. Again, Daredevil is a character I wouldn't actually start at the beginning with, because there was a point in the Daredevil series where he was sort of reinvented, and he was reinvented into the character that we know today as Daredevil. The early stuff, there was a lot of good early Daredevil stories. Some of it was really good. But if you're going to start with Daredevil, start with Frank Miller's Daredevil, which you can get. I have all the Frank Miller's Daredevil in these Visionaries volumes. Frank Miller took this character in the early 80s, pretty late in the series actually. He started in the issue 158 of Daredevil. And his initial run on Daredevil went through, what issue did it eventually finish up at? 191. He came back to Daredevil at one point. But it's these initial stories from Frank Miller that are the most important Daredevil stories. And they're the Daredevil stories which have influenced every Daredevil that has come after this. Every Daredevil story after this set of stories has been in one way or another affected by these stories. And it's certainly this character that you find in that Daredevil television show. Even that first not so great Daredevil movie took the story basically from this set of stories. It's a great set of stories. It's pretty much Frank Miller at his best in this set of Daredevil stories. They look great. They take this character who was kind of a second string superhero and they turn him into an urban crime fighter with a series of real crime stories set in a superhero comic. And they're great, and introduces the character of Elektra. Elektra is introduced in these stories, and they're just so good. Just such an excellent set of stories. The artwork, the writing, everything is spot on these stories for Daredevil. So it's definitely Frank Miller's Daredevil I would check out. Still available in these trade paperbacks, and a new edition of the Frank Miller Daredevil Omnibus is going to be printed very soon. I think it's up for pre-order. I know I pre-ordered it, so I'll be getting that to replace these. Eventually, you definitely want to start with Frank Miller's Daredevil. And we're going to close out on one of the most important Marvel comics of all, the X-Men. Let's finish off with the X-Men. Again, I'm not going to finish off, or I'm not going to suggest you start with the first issue of the X-Men, because the X-Men really became the X-Men we're familiar with today later on, with Dave Cockrum's and Chris Claremont's X-Men, which you can find in this Epic Collection. This is actually the 5th X-Men Epic Collection. This set of stories starts off with Giant Size X-Men number 1 and X-Men 94 through 110, and a bunch of other issues where the X-Men show up in other comics are in here. But definitely you're going to want to read these initial X-Men issues where the new X-Men show up. An X-Men that was completely redesigned and restarted, that start off with this Giant Size X-Men number 1. This is where Storm and Wolverine and Colossus all join the team. And we've got a whole new X-Men team. And these stories were just great. They're just such great stories. The artwork by Dave Cockrum is fantastic. Stories by Chris Claremont are really, really good. I mean, these are fantastic X-Men stories. And if you're going to start the X-Men, start here. I've been going on for almost a half an hour, so I will shut up now. But that is my Marvel Comics starter kit. I hope it was helpful if you want to dive into Marvel Comics. I will catch you next time.